There are things about my childhood that I look back on with warmth. The smell of pine needles mixed with wood smoke. The sound of my grandmother humming in the kitchen. The feeling of heavy wool blankets on a cold December night. But there is one memory, one specific tradition that doesn't bring warmth. It brings a cold so deep it settles in the marrow of my bones. It's a memory that makes me check the locks on my doors 3 times before I go to bed every Christmas Eve. Most families leave cookies and milk for Santa Claus. We did that too, of course, but that was the day tradition. That was the safe tradition. In my family, specifically on my mother's side, we had a night tradition. A tradition that we didn't talk about with our friends at school. A tradition that had to be followed with absolute precision or else. We called it the offering. My grandfather built the cabin in northern Minnesota in the late 40s. It was isolated, miles away from the nearest paved road, surrounded by a forest that felt ancient and watchful. Every Christmas, the entire extended family would drive up there. It was cramped, loud, and usually joyous. But as the sun began to set on December 24th, the mood in the house would shift. The laughter would die down. My grandfather would stop telling jokes. At exactly 10 p.m., my grandfather would go to the kitchen. He would take a heavy cast iron plate, a plate that was never used for anything else. He would place a large raw steak on it. Not cooked, no seasoning, just a slab of cold, raw red meat. Then he would walk to the back door, the door that led out to the dark, snow-covered woods. He would unlock the deadbolt. He would open the door just a crack, letting the freezing wind hiss into the warm kitchen. He would set the plate on the floor, right at the threshold, half inside the house, half outside. And then he would do the most important thing. He would leave the door unlocked. He would turn to us, all the grandchildren sitting in silence, and say the same thing every year. The door stays unlatched. The meat stays on the plate. No one enters the kitchen until sunrise. If you hear eating, you cover your ears. If you hear scratching, you close your eyes. We invite the guest, we feed the guest, and in return, the guest lets us live another year. We didn't ask who the guest was. We didn't want to know. As kids, we just felt the terror radiating off the adults. We went to bed, we pulled the covers over our heads, and we prayed for morning. And every morning on Christmas Day, the plate would be clean, licked clean, and the door would still be cracked open, just an inch, with snow blowing across the kitchen floor. This went on for 20 years without incident, until the year my cousin Lucas brought his new fiancée, Sarah, and his college roommate, a guy named Mark. Mark was one of those people who thought he was smarter than everyone in the room. He was a city guy, an engineer, a man of logic and science. He didn't grow up with our folklore. To him, the atmosphere in the cabin wasn't scary, it was funny. He treated it like a quaint, backward superstition of hillbilly farmers. That year, my grandfather was too sick to make the trip. He was in the hospital, dying of emphysema. My Uncle Robert was in charge of the tradition. The mood was already somber because we knew it would be Grandpa's last Christmas. The snowstorm outside was the worst we had seen in a decade. The wind was howling like a wounded animal, rattling the window panes. At 10 p.m., Uncle Robert did the ritual. He got the iron plate, he got the raw ribeye steak, he placed it at the threshold. He unlocked the back door, leaving it slightly ajar. He gave the warning, though his voice shook more than Grandpa's ever did. No one enters the kitchen. The door stays unlocked. We all went upstairs to the bedrooms. I was sharing a room with Lucas and Mark. I was 17 that year. Mark was in his 20s. I remember lying in the top bunk, listening to the wind. I was drifting off when I heard Mark whispering to Lucas below me. "This is ridiculous, man," Mark whispered. "You guys are serious? You're leaving the back door open in a blizzard? The pipes are going to burst, or a raccoon is going to get in and trash the kitchen." "It's the tradition, Mark. Just leave it," Lucas whispered back. Uncle Robert gets crazy about it. Just go to sleep. It's a waste of a good steak, Mark laughed. And it's dangerous. A bear could wander in. I'm going to go lock it. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I leaned over the side of the bunk. Don't, I hissed. Mark, seriously. Don't touch the door. Mark looked up at me in the dark, his teeth white in a condescending grin. Relax, kid. I'm doing you a favor. I'm not going to let us freeze to death because of some ghost story. Before Lucas or I could stop him, Mark slipped out of bed. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. He opened the bedroom door and crept into the hallway. I looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at me. We were paralyzed. It's hard to explain the fear we felt. It wasn't logical. It was primal. It was the fear of breaking a rule that had kept us safe for generations. I heard Mark's footsteps on the wooden stairs. Creak, creak, creak. I heard him walk across the living room rug. I heard him enter the kitchen. Then I heard the specific, heavy clunk of the back door being pushed shut. I heard the click-clack of the deadbolt sliding home. Then silence. Mark came back upstairs a minute later. He looked smug. Done, he whispered, and I put the steak back in the fridge. No sense in wasting it. You guys can thank me in the morning when the kitchen isn't full of snow. He got back in the bed. Lucas turned his back to him and didn't say a word. I pulled the blanket up to my nose. I stared at the ceiling. I wanted to go down and unlock it. I wanted to fix it, but I was too terrified to move. I told myself it was just a story. I told myself Mark was right. It was 1998, for God's sake. We didn't need to fear monsters in the woods. I watched the digital clock on the bedside table. 10:30, 11 o'clock, 11:30. The wind outside seemed to change pitch. It stopped howling and started whistling, a high, thin sound like air being sucked through teeth. At 12:55, the house settled. You know that feeling when the air pressure drops before a storm. The room felt heavy, my ears popped. At 12 a.m., exactly midnight, I heard it. It wasn't a knock. A knock implies knuckles on wood. This was a heavy, wet thud against the back door, like a side of beef being thrown against the timber. Mark shifted in his bed. What was that? He mumbled, half asleep. Thud. It was louder this time. The whole house seemed to vibrate. Lucas sat up. Mark, he whispered, what did you do? It's probably a branch, Mark said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Or a bear. I told you, the meat attracts bears. Scratch. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like iron nails dragging down the painted wood of the door. Scratch. Long, deep. Then silence again. A silence that lasted for maybe a minute, but felt like an hour. Then came the sound that made me wet the bed. I am not ashamed to admit it. I was 17 and I wet myself in sheer terror. It was the sound of the doorknob. The back door had an old round brass knob. It was slightly loose. We could hear it rattling. Ch, 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 ch. Someone was turning it, trying to open it. Then a pause. Then the handle rattled violently. Clack, 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 clack. It knew. Whatever was outside knew the door was locked. It knew the rule had been broken. Mark was sitting up now. Who's down there? He called out. His voice cracked. I have a gun. He didn't have a gun. From downstairs, we heard a sound that defies description. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a roar. It was a voice, but it sounded like it was coming from a throat filled with fluid, bubbling and thick. Open. It wasn't a request. It was a mimicry. It sounded like it was trying to imitate a human voice but didn't know how to shape the vowels. Open. Lucas started crying, silent tears streaming down his face. You killed us, he whispered to Mark. You killed us all. Mark jumped out of bed.
"I'm going down there," he said, trying to regain his bravado. "It's a prank. It's your Uncle Robert trying to scare me." "No, Mark, don't go down there." But Mark was fueled by adrenaline and denial. He grabbed a heavy flashlight from the nightstand and stomped out of the room. I heard him running down the stairs. "All right, very funny. Open the door yourself." I scrambled out of the bunk and crawled to the bedroom door. I peeked through the crack. I could see the hallway and the top of the stairs. I heard Mark enter the kitchen. "There's nobody here," Mark shouted. "The door is shaking, though. Is someone out there?" He walked to the back door. I heard him reach for the deadbolt. I think he intended to throw the door open and confront the prankster. But he didn't get the chance. The moment his hand touched the lock, the door didn't open. It bowed inward. Something hit the door